Welcome to Making Happy Digital Cities and the Role of Blended Finance. Many of you are traveling across the clouds to join us today. We'll present to you a fascinating panel of Minister of Neuroscientists, financial leaders, and researchers on the intersection of tech and humanities. Myself, I'm Strari Nosalim. I'm a dreamer of Kura-Kura, Bali, Indonesia, and believer in uniting in our diversity. We are delighted to see our dear friends and all of you here who believe we can frame a narrative for our better common tomorrow. I will start by inviting our Indonesian Minister of National Planning, Minister Suharto, who is going to travel over time and space to talk to us. Please.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Jeffrey Shah of Columbia University as the President of UN Sustainable Development Solution Network, or SDGs, and Ms. Jerry Nursalim, Co-Chair of Southeast Asia UN SDGs. It is a great opportunity for me to deliver keynote speech at this international conference on sustainable development, or ICSD Summit 2020. I believe this event is very important to invent and share practical solutions for accelerating the achievement of Sustainable Development Goals 2030. I would like to appreciate the UN SDGs collaborative work across the world to support SDGs 2030, including in Indonesia. The government of Indonesia has been giving high attention to build network with various stakeholders in order to achieve our SDGs in Indonesia. Ladies and gentlemen, nowadays the world is facing the COVID-19 pandemic. As a global community, we are continuing to respond its impact by managing comprehensive policies. Our government has also committed to emphasize the significance of social capital to recover the impact of COVID-19. The COVID-19 pandemic has not only created new challenges, but also provided many lessons to all of us. The spread of virus has influenced many aspects of our life, including mental health. In this context, the medicine for mental health pressure is actually happiness. Some research has shown that being happier may help our immune system strong. In this context, happiness will promote well-being of our people, increase positive mentality, and remove anxiety, as well as develop good culture. Luckily, Indonesia has an existing tradition in developing happiness. One of the famous happiness principles is Balinese philosophy, Tri Hita Karana. It is the principle of three ways to happiness that leads to the welfare and prosperity of human life, which includes the harmony between human to human, human to environment, and human to the God. The Tri Hita Karana is also aligned with the Muslims' principle of harmony, which is Hablu minan nas, Hablu minal alam, and Hablu minallah. It is a presentation of harmony among people, ecology, and God. Indonesia has adopted the Tri Hita Karana principle into the SDG happiness pyramid, framing the 17 Sustainable Development Goals according to the three pathways to happiness rooted in Indonesian traditional culture. This is one of our efforts to localize SDGs into the Indonesian tradition context. Ladies and gentlemen, in Indonesia's perspective, technology and culture can walk in harmony. Improving well-being of our people can be promoted through creating happy environment and happy places to live in. In this regard, the government should view an option that a happy digital city can provide a better life. Advancement in digital technology can ensure universal access for all and improve people's welfare. It can also provide better services, improve quality of life, and create a happier life. The government of Indonesia has a high commitment to build urban development strategy for the sustainable future. One of the key initiatives is Smart Cities Framework. We believe that the use of information technology can transform lifestyle of people, urban economy, urban-rural linkage, urban workplace, as well as urban spatial plan. Based on Bali's experience, we hope that technology, culture, and environment work hand in hand with harmony. We endorse local wisdom to be a key element of happy digital city in Indonesia. We realize that we need investment for delivering the SDGs. Achieving the SDGs with this philosophy in mind will require trillions of resources. Its implementation requires significant mobilization of investment, resources, and financing innovation. Such a paradigm shift calls for a wide-range financing framework that is capable of channeling resource and investment, such as public and private, national and global. Therefore, to realize the happy digital cities, we need to design an innovative financial framework, both the government budget and the others. Collaboration and partnership with all stakeholders building happy digital cities is necessary for both the development process and financing mobilization. It is important we emphasize that the SDGs principle is no one left behind. I'm proud to mention that Indonesia has initiated the Tri Hita Karana roadmap for blended finance, launched on the sidelines of the 2018 World Bank annual meeting in Bali, Indonesia. Blended finance is a great platform to mobilize financing for SDGs activities. The government of Indonesia is currently developing several schemes of blended finance, including public-private partnership, non-state budget investment financing, and collaborative financing schemes. Furthermore, the government and National Zakat Agency have agreed to channel the religious donations such as zakat, wakaf, and sedekah to finance SDGs activities. The implementation of blended finance under SDG Indonesia One has shown promising results. For example, the platform managed around 2.34 billion of funds to leverage 93 projects such as urban transport, telecommunication, water, railway, road, tourism, renewable energy, ports, and several projects of special economic zone. I remember 2013 Nobel Prize winning economist Robert Shiller shared that finance is one of the most powerful tools for solving our common problems and increasing the general well-being. We need more financial innovation, not less, and finance should play a larger role in helping society achieve its goals. He also stated that finance should be defined not merely as the manipulation of money or the management of risk, but as the stewardship of society's assets. Blended finance is one of financing innovation and society's asset that we can utilize to pursue the Indonesian commitment in achieving the SDGs target by 2030. Lastly, blended finance is a good representation of financing collaboration and multi-stakeholder partnership that really aligns with full 17 partnership for the cause. Finally, we believe that network and collaboration is a key to any innovation strategy today. In this difficult time, we have to work together to save our world, our land, and our people. Stay healthy and safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Suharto, to share Indonesia's efforts as a G20 member and developing nation. SDGs have been incorporated into the national decree, and I admire a government that is not satisfied to follow the beaten path. Actually, on New Year's Day this year, I was with my husband in a Japanese shrine in Japan, and we got a call, or I got a call, and the Minister Suharto was calling me, and was asking about or we discussed about the ecological master planners. So we are very touched to have ministers who are very dedicated and believing in what is needed with harmony with the planet as we develop our cities. So next, I'd like to turn to Professor Elkanon, who is the director of Luria Neurology Institute and the professor of the clinical studies at the New York University. He studies the brain behavior paradigm, and I vividly recall our meeting in Bali at the Starbucks Dewata. By the way, that's the SDSN campus now in Bali, Southeast Asia. And I think it was with the MIT Sustainability Initiative. And we were, since our meeting, we have been working on over space and time, planning for months and weeks to study the science behind happiness and the Balinese and ways and other, how does the physiology integrates. Please, Professor Elkanon, the sky is yours. I won't say the floor, the sky is yours. Go ahead. You have to unmute, sorry.
Thank you for having me up in the sky with you all. It's a pleasure to be here. Of course, happiness is one of the items of our main items on our agenda today. So let me talk about the neuroscience of happiness. Happiness, of course, is usually traditionally understood in psychological terms, maybe in socioeconomic terms, but it can also be approached as a matter of neuroscience. And so we're planning to develop a lab to study the neuroscience of happiness, and very appropriately, we're going to set this lab in Bali, at the United in Diversity Creative Center in Bali. So it's work in progress. And the objective, now, can we see my slides? Where are they? Okay, well, I will proceed without slides. Can you see my slides? Can the audience see my slides? No?
No, not yet. It looks like they're still being pulled up.
Sorry, yes.
So we'll talk without the slides. So the purpose is to integrate the neurobiology of the neurobiological approaches to happiness with the more traditional psychological and socioeconomic approaches. And how is that possible? It's possible because happiness has a distinctly neurobiological basis. When somebody feels happy, this feeling, subjective feeling of happiness, is actually mediated by the release of various biochemicals, by oxytocin, endorphins, dopamine, serotonin. Okay, my slides caught up with me. Now you see my slides, yes? All right. And so let's refer to them for the purpose of this talk as happy biochemicals. So the question that we want to ask is how they are related to the subjective feeling of happiness. We know the societies today are ranked on happiness indices. This is an initiative by the United Nations, so that there are various scales, and different societies are ranked in terms of their happiness. So the question then becomes, well, are there differences in the baseline levels of these neurotransmitters, of these happy biochemicals across these various societies? If there are, then the next question is, are they immutable, or are they subject of change? to change when the circumstances change, and whether they are correlated with the rankings of various societies on these happiness scales, which are, published by the United Nations at regular intervals. Okay, now. And the next question is, are these the biochemical variables and the baseline levels of these neurotransmitters, so-called happy biochemicals, are they correlated with various socioeconomic variables? So what is the relationship? And do they change in people when their socioeconomic circumstances change? Okay, so these are, because up to this point, happiness has been studied in strictly psychological and socioeconomic terms, these questions have yet to be addressed. And we will probably be the first ones, to the best of my knowledge, to address these questions. And are there also, the next question is, are there any cultural differences? And so this is about the relationship between happiness and various population characteristics. But similar questions can be asked with respect to individuals. So what is the relationship, for instance, between individual subjective feeling of happiness and these baseline levels of happy biochemicals in given individuals? There are all kinds of scales of happiness, which, questionnaires, which individuals can answer, and then you can rank individuals in terms of their subjective experience of happiness. Okay? Are these rankings correlated with the biochemical variables? Because we want to understand kind of the mechanisms, the biological mechanisms behind these subjective feelings of happiness. And again, just as we have this question with populations, we can add them with individuals. Are the individual baseline levels of these happy biochemicals immutable? Are they the same in the given individual? Or will they change if that individual circumstances will change? Okay. So these are all questions which we plan to address. And as I said, to the best of our knowledge, we'll be the first ones to do it. Now, another issue of interest is happiness as a cultural construct. Okay, in different societies, kind of the conception of happiness is different. And an interesting contrast, at least interesting to me, is between the communal construct of happiness versus individualistic construct of happiness. In a communal concept of happiness, an individual is happy if he or she is surrounded with social harmony. I am happy when you are happy. So this notion of harmony among people is paramount. Other societies, and in my experience, I live in New York, but I've traveled quite extensively in Southeast Asia, and I was impressed by how important this construct of harmony is to their societies and to their the concept of happiness. So this is clearly a very communally oriented construct of happiness. By contrast, in many Western societies, the construct of happiness is very individualistic. In a sense, it's a zero-sum game. I'm happy when I do better than you do, okay? Which is the opposite of this notion that I'm happy when you are happy. So there are these very different constructs of cultural constructs of happiness, which prevail in different cultures. And so then the question is, are there some underlying biochemical differences? What are the biochemical profiles behind these different cultural constructs of happiness? Again, interesting and important question, which as of yet has not been addressed, let alone answered. Another interesting issue is, keep in mind that we'll be conducting this research at the United in Diversity Creative Center. So creativity is also a central construct. What is the relationship between happiness and creativity? Is there such a thing as too much happiness? Because, one can reason logically that in order to thrive toward progress is change. If you are completely happy, then you don't experience any need for change, okay? So one can argue, and it has been argued, that progress is driven by some degree of dissatisfaction with the status quo. And without this kind of a tension between status quo and your desires, there will be no progress, okay? And in fact, in one of my books, I introduced this notion, Magellan on Prozac, sort of tongue-in-cheek, kind of arguing that had there been antidepressants in the age of great mariners, then Columbus and Magellan and Vasco da Gama would have popped a bunch of antidepressants and would not have bothered to go and discover the world. All right. So the question is either an optimal level of individual happiness to stimulate the creative process. So these are, again, questions interrelating these two central constructs, happiness and creativity, which we'll try to address. And we will be doing this work in Bali, as I said. And of course, Bali is a unique place. Bali has been referred to as the island of gods. It has also been referred to as the Florence of the East. It's renowned and unique for its creativity, artistic creativity, music, painting, batik, everything, sculpture. Which provides for a unique opportunity to study the relation between subjective feeling of happiness and creativity in artists and musicians, okay? And that speaks to what I said earlier, either an optimal level of happiness to drive creative process. So Bali may be, artistic creativity in Bali may be, provide a unique opportunity to study these relationships. So what are the baseline levels of these happy biochemicals in Balinese artists and musicians, and how do they compare with those in the general population, in the Balinese population, and in the relationship between these baseline levels and creative output, and what are these levels during the creative process itself. So these are the various questions which we plan to address, and we'll look forward to it. And I think I ran out of my 5 minutes. So thank you for your attention. I imagine that there will be
Thank you, Professor.
Some questions, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Professor Alkanon. So I love how you describe the happy, the biochemicals, and then how we also can relate to the cultural and the spiritual. Next, I'd like to turn to my decades-old friend, Leslie from South Africa, whom I met through the World Economic Forum Young Global Leaders program. And I think your country has many inspiring figures, and I had the privilege to meet with Madiba or Nelson Mandela. And in the finance world, you are the South African hero, and you have also left to develop the new development bank. And what I admire is not only your brilliance, but also you have a soul that has courage and integrity. So please, Leslie, thank you.
Thank you very much, Sherry, for that kind introduction. Can I just make sure that you can hear me okay? Thank you very much. And it is indeed an honor and a privilege to participate in this conversation. As Sherry has just mentioned, multilateral banks like the New Development Bank, the World Bank, Asia Development Bank, all of these institutions that are focused on the public good have a very unique role in the world, a very unique role because our mandate is global and multilateral. We work across countries. We are therefore focused on outcomes that benefit the people at large. The second major benefit of institutions of this kind is that we focus on the long term. Most of our society, as you know, whether it be our stock markets, whether it be the way companies assess people, the way people organize their lives, people are focused on short-term pleasure, and the concept of happiness in that context is a very interesting one. However, we are focused on the very long term, so we can cast our lenses forward and not be too sidetracked by what's happening in the immediate. The next point I'd like to make is that especially during a time like today, especially during a period of global pandemics, these institutions become even more critical in society because of that long-term role, and then also because another feature that makes these institutions unique is what we call our counter-cyclical role, meaning that as the markets move in a particular manner, whether it is, a expansion in the credit cycle or kind of booming economic conditions, and then when markets contract again, we are able to go against the cycle as we are doing right now. So right now, many of these institutions, ourselves, the World Bank, Asia Development Bank, we are all focused on marshalling as much resources as possible to ensure that we do not go into a very deep structural decline. So, for example, the IMF has been to date been approached by half of its members for support. That has never happened in the history of the institutions. So many of the ideals that we hold dear in terms of producing a more sustainable, a more inclusive world with less inequality, with less poverty, all of those ideals are very threatened by this current global pandemic and the global economic crisis that we are confronted with. At the heart of what we are trying to do as multilateral banks is to create sustainable cities. And this is why I like the theme of what we are talking about today. The only way for us to create sustainable communities long term is if we reconfigure and reconstruct the notion of a city and how we can foster a greater sense of community spirit amongst people. So we are redefining and re-looking at how we do our business, because historically we have been focused on supporting governments at a national level, and most of the financial assistance that we provide has been to governments at that level. But it is very clear throughout the world that cities are becoming much more important economic actors. Cities have a great capacity to engineer more focused development outcomes. And it is clear also that that is where the rubber hits the road in terms of the key metrics that matter, which is a healthy population, number one. Number two, an educated population. And then three, social cohesion. As you know, one of the aspects that have really been it's come to the fore in a significant way over the last 8-9 months as we battled with this global pandemic is the lack of social cohesion in many communities. And that really is underpinned by this notion of happiness. So there's just two, three final points that I'd like to make as part of this conversation. The first one is that now more than ever, we have to preserve these institutions that are focused on the public good. We have to throw every resource and every effort to ensure that these institutions are not undermined. As you know, during moments of crisis, it is so, there's a strong impulse to look inward. There's a strong impulse to only look after your own, which for us in the development bank is probably one of the greatest threats that have emerged in the world over the last 8 months. Let me contrast this with 2008. In 2008, the G20 stepped forward and became the most prominent coordinated multilateral global response to that crisis that existed then. Let me not criticize the G20 very overtly, because they are very strong partners, but the multilateral institutions, whether it's the G7, the G20, have been markedly absent as we deal with what is the biggest crisis since the Second World War. So I guess what I'm saying is that it is so important for us to protect this ethos of multilateralism, because without that, we will not be able to deepen what I would call social solidarity amongst nations. Final point I'd like to make, as you know, is that countries and regions have been affected differently by this crisis. For example, some countries are very dependent on tourism, and because of COVID-19, their revenues have been wiped out. Other countries are much more commodity dependent. Oil prices have collapsed and they are in deep distress. Other countries depend on remittances, and because a lot of people have lost their jobs during this crisis, they are therefore deprived of those revenues. So countries have been hit in various ways. So there cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach to re-engineer and re-look at how we're going to resuscitate cohesion and a response to the global crisis. I guess what I'm saying overall, in summary, Sherry, is that the foundations of our world have been shaken. What is required now is for us to retreat back into restoring those first principles around social solidarity, the importance of public health, the importance of social cohesion amongst our communities. Without these aspects in place, we will never be able to create what we are talking about here, which is community-centered around sustainability, community-centered around inclusiveness in the medium term. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leslie, for that call to action. And I think indeed we live in a time where we all need to do our part. And I want to also sort of what you say about, we have been in the ego system, and now we have to move towards a system, the more ecosystem that support the global as well, the other multilateral. But on that front, on the finance, how do we go from an ego finance model to an ecosystem finance model? And that I think one of the terminology that has been championed by Chris Kaya, who has been in IFC, and from early on she has been supporting this blended finance, climate finance. And I remember our meeting in the IFC office. I was still sort of, with Mari Pangestu, we were co-founding founders with the Indonesian government of the Tri Hita Karana Forum, and the one on the blended finance and innovation in Bali around the IMF World Bank meetings was new in a way on this topic. So you were one of my sort of mentors, and I am very pleased on the day, you were in Bali and you were part of that launch together with OECDs and WEP and many other partners on the Tri Hita Karana roadmap on blended finance. And please explain a little bit, what is blended finance? What is this journey? And also, I think what you have done to support the world in this fight. Thank you.
Sherry, thank you very much, first of all, and it's a pleasure, and you bring very good memories of, conversations that we have had over the years. For those of you that are less familiar with blended finance, I'll basically describe, I will say probably that is what is the definition that many of us in this work use, and I am speaking in particular many of the development finance institutions that have been the early implementers of blended finance. I mean, we have used this model, I will say, of finance for many years, and it has been the DFIs that have done this. But when we talk about blended finance, we talk about the combination of commercially minded finance, finance that is coming for a private sector project that perhaps has a lot of impact but has trouble getting started. And then you bring some public finance that we may bring from governments, from our development partners, from foundations, from other groups that are interested in moving towards additional impact. And it's this combination to move forward the SDG, to mobilize additional finance, to get additional impact. This is how we bring together this group of different investors and mindsets and bring blended finance. As Sherry mentioned, with the Tri Hita Karana, we have been thinking about this and about a roadmap and about principles. The OECD has been a very strong partner on this. Together with the DFI working group, we have also mapped the roadmap of the Tri Hita Karana to our own blended finance principles that we use. And I just wanted to very briefly describe these principles and this roadmap. And the first thing is that we should be focusing on where we are most needed. I think Leslie really had a very nice point that he was making, that in many cases it has been big, the central government. Now we are thinking about cities in this particular context. Also, we have been thinking for many years, we use blended finance in the climate space. We have been also adding many other areas, agriculture, health, education. So we are seeing how we are expanding beyond, and I think that's the important part of the practice principle that the roadmap has. Mobilization has been at the core of, what we mean about blended finance, and the minister did talk about the importance of mobilizing private sector, money. And for doing that, when we use concessionality, we try to minimize concessionality. It is the opposite. You put a small amounts of public funds because you want to bring the private sector and make it commercially sustainable. We also try to bring, reinforce markets, build inclusive business, inclusive markets, and this is a very important element of it. And for all of this, we are all committed to very high standards, to bring impact. And we find this, that it is the base, I will say, of this happiness pyramid that the Tri Hita Karana is bringing. So as the IFC, we have also, in addition of engaging with the Tri Hita Karana roadmap and our partners, we have also been leading the other DFIs in this practice of blended finance to try to bring, more best practices to what we do. The more we share, the more we exchange experiences, the better we are, in that context. And for that, I just wanted to highlight the evolution of blended finance, because sometimes it's important. Now many of us talk about blended finance, but IFC started in the early 2000s with about 40 million under management. When you look at now, we have more than 5 billion under management, to basically promote projects that deserve this type of support. Over the last 10 years, we have used about 1.6 billion in blended finance to support more than 250 investments, and across many sectors, leveraging more than 13 billion in IFC and other third-party money. So you can just see this level of mobilization and bringing this. I also wanted to have a couple of additional points to connect it back to the theme of this conversation. Happy cities, digital, cities here. We have seen in the recent past many transactions that are trying to connect, digital technology to cities. How do we enable informal retailers to be connected to manufacturers? How do we help food distribution programs to be connected through technology? How do we help venture capital, funds that are predominantly investing in the digital space to be focusing not only on, technology, but also to be thinking about bringing additional diversity through more gender lenses investment. We also are seeing, as I mentioned, agricultural, platforms that are bringing, the rural and the urban together. We are also seeing new ways of intelligent transportation, trying to connect cities. So all of this evolution we are seeing over the last several years. The level of complexity is increasing in all fronts. Technology is becoming more complex, business models are becoming more complex. So the strategic use of blended finance is also a very important part of this puzzle to enhance impact and at the same time bring most of the private sector into the conversation. We are seeing a very important trend across many institutions, seeing that we are applying blended finance in a very rigorous way in which we are thinking about the creation of markets. I think that Leslie also mentioned how important during COVID-19 has been to be thinking not only about creating new markets, but also preserving the impact that we have been able to achieve, ensuring that we preserve jobs, that we preserve the small gains that we have had over time. So with this, I would like to just thank you again, Sherry. Very happy to entertain some additional conversation, but always a very strong supportive of what you are doing and what Indonesia has done in the leadership in blended finance.
Thank you so much, Chris Kaya, and you really have covered all the different aspects of the SDGs, and I think you also mentioned about the gender. So I think I'm very I do believe that we need the world can have more of that energies, the positive energies. I think we were lucky in Bali. We had, Christine Lagarde, Kristalina, Mari Pangestu, Malco Ishii, and I think Christiana Figueres has also been our THK steering committee. We really, I think, believe that if there is a spiritual aspect, we need to bring together the both energies. So it's sort of the balance. And so next, I would like to turn to Andre Earl, who is an amazing effort to link technology with what is happening on the humanities side. And he's a researcher at Harvard University and co-founder of the Council of Expanded Intelligence. And that was the IEEE, which sets the standard for all the technology companies, as well as at that time with Media Lab. And I think we invite you to share with us what is right, and if without that technology, we wouldn't have this meeting. So that allows the virtual for the UNGA and ICSD in COVID's time. But there are also a lot of crime and other issues with technology. So please enlighten us. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sherry, for the kind introduction. I hope I can enlighten you as much as I can. It is such an honor to be part of this panel, especially as we're not only talking about digital cities and finance, but about happy digital cities and blended finance. And as somebody who is walking that fine line between tech and ethics, I'm hoping that I can contribute something meaningful to this conversation. And I would like to begin by re-emphasizing that we are at a real turning point in history, because although the remarkable advances of the fourth industrial revolution are rapidly expanding our knowledge and capacity through new technologies, the dream of exponential growth that is often circulated around the tech industry is currently overshadowed by systemic imbalances on an unprecedented scale, such as the collapse of ecosystems and mass forced migration, endemic health hazards, and widening socioeconomic inequities. And as we can see with the COVID-19 pandemic, is disrupting our economic, political, and educational institutions even further, and in ways that are yet to be fathomed. I think we are also given an unparalleled opportunity to reset the very metrics of success that are driving the fourth industrial revolution. So for me, the challenge of sustainable development is not simply a matter of faster and smarter technologies or economic growth or globalization, but it is also that of the relational dynamics that give our collective life a quality and a purpose. So what we are doing is harnessing the community virtues and values captured in millennia of cultural, religious, and spiritual heritage to guide the cutting edge of research and development. And by doing that, I believe it is possible to model a completely new paradigm of so-called awareness-based innovation, which leverages the power of different forms of intelligence to transform today's social, political, and economic structures for a future of shared flourishing. And in this regard, the pursuit of happiness in particular has been a supreme aim of human culture since ancient times. It has enlightened the endeavors of spiritual seekers and scientists alike. And the Indonesian island of Bali, that is the central theme of today's talk, actually has not only a rich cultural heritage, but an actual philosophy of happiness that emphasizes 3 levels of harmony, as we have heard earlier. It is the so-called Tri Hita Karana system that integrates the harmony between self and people, self and ecology, and self and spirit into a holistic interrelationship. And so now I would like to share my screen to give you an insight about how we are using the Tri Hita Karana model to emphasize the idea of awareness-based technology. So the Tri Hita Karana model is visualized as interrelated arches of transformation, which connect at their peak points to form a feedback loop, as you can see. And we developed a compass for awareness-based technology that converts the original Tri Hita Karana model into an interface of 3 spheres. You can see there's the biosphere, which is the worldwide sum of all ecosystems. Then there is the technosphere, which is all the systems that are made or modified by humans for use in human activities or human habitats. And then third, there is the ethnosphere, which is defined by anthropologist Wade Davis as the sum total of all thoughts and intuitions, myths and beliefs, ideas and inspirations brought into being by human imagination since the dawn of consciousness. And as you can tell in our model, the biosphere is brought alive through the interplay of nature and spirit. The technosphere is thought to be brought alive through the interplay of people and nature. And the ethnosphere is thought to be brought alive through the interplay of people and spirit. And so the three peak points of the Tri Hita Karana harmony can be considered as energy vectors of an integrated system, and their distributed strength determines the balance of the system as a whole. And what we are currently witnessing in the so-called Anthropocene is the symptom of an overgrowth of the technosphere through unilateral technoscientific globalization that has weakened the different other spheres, and so therefore also the energy vectors of the Tri Hita Karana harmony. And what we are hoping to do in Bali in our living lab is to revitalize the Tri Hita Karana system through cross-disciplinary sense-making processes, which are visualized in the outer layers of this compass. So harmony with nature is the balancing act between economic and spiritual perspectives. Harmony with spirit is the balancing act between artistic and scientific perspectives. And harmony with people is the balancing act between local and global perspectives, or in another version of this compass, I also called it a balancing act between social and political perspectives. So this Tri Hita Karana compass provides the coordinates for navigating the paradigm shifts of the 21st century. And it's leading from an emergent future that can be characterized as an awareness-based revolution through a resynchronization of the technosphere with the biosphere and the ethnosphere. And so I'm hoping that this compass can also provide a guide for us to talk today more about happy digital cities and the role of blended finance. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre, for that amazing presentation. And I think at this stage, we'd like to open the floor for questions. You can I see people from all over the region, and I think Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia, Brazil, Canada, India, and we have someone who says Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, United in Diversity. Thank you. So Alexandra, yeah. So thank you. Please, you can type in your questions. Otherwise, maybe I'll open to the panelists after you have listened to the other amazing presentations from different lenses. Please just jump in and share, how you feel. So look at this Q&A. All right. So the first question that is the most people voted for this question, Professor Goldberg. Thank you very much for the presentation. Is there any study correlating environment and happiness? And then I think the second, I'm just going to read two and then the rest can prepare. Could you give a couple of real life examples of Tri Hita Karana, how it has been implemented? So I think I will start with these two. Maybe Professor Goldberg, please.
Well, yes, I think that this ranking of societies in terms of happiness by the United Nations is an example of an attempt to correlate happiness with various socioeconomic environmental factors. So the whole point of the work that we're trying to initiate in Bali is to complement this approach, which is quite an established approach by adding a neuroscientific perspective so that we can integrate both subjective psychological and neuroscientific and socioeconomic, sort of environmental, in a very broad sense, perspectives. In terms of the Balinese conception of happiness, I've been visiting Bali for 30 years, literally. So I became somewhat acquainted with the Balinese culture, and I've always been impressed by this both feeling of harmony that the members of this society emanate when you interact with them, and how central this whole construct of harmony is to their concept of happiness. I remember the conversation, casual conversation with a taxi cab driver in Denpasar. Okay, he was saying literally, we don't have a lot of money, but we live in harmony. And then on another occasion, a friend of mine, an acquaintance of mine, came to have lunch with me, and he looked miserable. And I asked him, "Why do you look so miserable?" He said, "Because there is no harmony in my life." So, so these were two examples in casual interactions of how central the notion of harmony is to that society. And then I thought to myself, how take a typical average American, how often has he or she had an occasion to use the word harmony in his or her life? And the answer is probably never, okay, other than in a very limited sense of kind of a musical composition. So in our Western society, at least in North American society, the notion of harmony is rather peripheral, bordering on absent. Whereas in Balinese society, and that was my sense in other societies I traveled quite extensively when I was younger in Southeast Asia, either to those cultures, this notion of harmony, kind of a sense of communal co-belonging, as I was saying in my presentation, in order for me to be happy, you have to be happy, is very central to their society. And so then the interesting question is, at least interesting to people like myself, well, what are the underlying neurobiological variables behind these different cultural constructs of happiness? And we plan to study it, and we'll do it in Bali.
Thank you very much. And do the others want to share? You know, there's some examples of the sort of, it does not necessarily have to come from Bali, but I think the values of Tri Hita Karana in terms of supporting harmony of people with planet as well on the spiritual side, and maybe from some other traditions. Do you want to comment? I know the Balinese, the subak system, I think because the question was on environment, the subak system is the way they support the agriculture, the water, the way they flow of the water that share and support. And it has won also the UNESCO recognition. So maybe that's one example. And another question is, how would you define spirituality, or how do you see how the process of the spiritual growth from individuals and in society, how do you facilitate that process? So any input on that?
Again, from me?
No, I think maybe the other panelists. Okay, maybe from your own work, you know, what drives you spiritually to do what you do, which is really helping so many, whether it's for the climate issues, whether it's for the SMEs, or, you know, providing livelihoods. What drives you spiritually? Maybe that I would like to frame it that way. So maybe Chris Kaya, you want to share what made you do what you do?
Thank you, Sherry. And I think, you know, it's that in one way or another, that ability to help others. And I think many of us working in development finance is exactly that, whether you are supporting, you know, a small business owner, whether you are changing, you know, the lives of, you know, a group that is trying to benefit from something that we are financing on the agricultural sector, whether you are creating a healthcare, new healthcare solution that has some reliance in technology. At the bottom of all of it, we are trying to help someone beyond, ourselves, beyond our immediate surrounding. And probably from my perspective, that is something that, connects the many different things that I do, and also keeps me motivating and wanting to do more and more of what I do.
Maybe just from each of you, and then we may need to wrap up already. So just what drives you spiritually, to do what you do? And please, maybe Leslie.
Thank you very much, Sherry. Just to amplify what Kuskaya has just said, I mean, I would capture it also around what I would call obligations that each one of us, there's so much discussion in society about, the rights of the individual. But I think each one of us, and this is also deeply rooted in African culture where I'm from, it's about a set of obligations we have to the next generation, right? Remember, we are just occupying this earth for duration of our lives here. Once we are gone, it doesn't sort of end there, right? It continues through the lives of our children, grandchildren, and our legacy is really what we leave behind. And that is really ultimately what life, I believe, is about. It's your ability to leave a lasting and for me, a lasting impact is about, a society with, as you know, we have a huge amounts of natural resources that are not renewable, right? The air we breathe, the quality of the soil, the water resources, right? What we do in development finance is making a lasting long-term impact to ensure quality of life of those who will come after us. And for me, that is really at the heart of what inspires me to go to work in the morning.
Thank you, Leslie. Andre, please.
Yeah, well, as an academic who is looking a lot at the different ways we are defining intelligence right now, that we are transcending in an age of sustainable development and artificial intelligence, right? It is really for me about recognizing that there are so many different ways of knowing and making sense of the world. And I mentioned it earlier in my sharing. It's kind of the quality and the purpose of what we are doing that connects to the spiritual. It's something that you cannot really rationally conceptualize. It is something that belongs to the heart, the open heart, the open mind, the open sense. And it's something that is guiding you to a bigger picture, to a higher purpose. And that is also why we are all coming together. And there are certain spots in this world, like Bali, which have that power to convene a group of people who are really kind of driving these changes. So for me, it is really an intuition that connects me to the spiritual.
Kanon, maybe in one sentence we have, thank you.
Well, what drives us scientists is very similar to what drives Leslie in his endeavor, to generate knowledge and understanding to help humanity, to help people.
Thank you very much to all the panelists. I just want to close because there's this question with quite a few votes that what does academia have a role to play in all this, and what can we expect from the education on this sustainable reset? So I would like to close in a response to this. Actually, we're hoping to create sort of this campus that invite all partners from around the world, universities as well as other sectors, and all of you are partners to us, which we are very grateful for. And so we believe not all profits is equal. We believe not all finance is equal, and not all technology is equal. And in Bali, this Tri Hita Karana values is under threat. I think you saw Andre's sphere. So how do we support communities, indigenous communities across different parts of the world? And we invite you to join us, and we will launch the first Happy Digital X program, cities, systems, products, communities, so that we can support and build a trust for our common tomorrow. Thank you very much.